to the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast, week 5 college football slate. We got first handicapper up, Robbie Veno, on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. Robbie, welcome in. How you feeling, bud?
I am good today, Drew. Another full college football weekend. SEC moves into week 2, so we'll get right at it here with this Every Game on the Board podcast. Probably, one of our favorite times of the week doing this segment. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a lot of fun. And heck, let's get right after it. We got a weekday game in college football here, Robbie. 103, 104, the rotation numbers, guys. And actually, I should go over the schedule for the show. We'll have Robbie coming in, going up to 120 rotation numbers. So the first 10 games on the slate about. Then we'll bring in Mid-Major Matt and then Oskheim Sports to finish out every single game on the board. It is like the title, EGBOT. So we got Robbie, first game up here, Thursday night action, Louisiana Tech at BYU, 22 ranked BYU here. BYU laying 24 at home, hosting Louisiana Tech, and it looks like the total's 59 here, Robbie. Interested in betting the Thursday nighter?
Well, some people are, Drew, because there's been big jumps in both, right? I think BYU's increased by about 2.5 points on the number. I think it went from 21.5 all the way to 24. And the total started at 56, and we saw an immediate rise to 59. I can't say that I disagree. I think off of what people have seen in 2 Brigham Young performances, the offense against Navy that night, 55 points, and then you turn around and watch them against Troy in what I can only quote you as with the Degenerate Special on Saturday night. They put up 45, I think 45 more, 48 more against Troy, and looked great doing it. They had some COVID concerns in that game. They weren't necessarily at full strength, but you wouldn't know it by the offense. And in fact, quarterback Zach Wilson, right before that game, maybe the day before that game, he was quoted as saying, "This offense is as explosive as it's ever been since I've been here." And he hasn't been there that long, but to say that BYU is once again an explosive offense is a big deal, right? Because they've been pedestrian at best for a lot of years now. And you watch them play, and they throw it around a lot. And I had mentioned, I think on the show with you and Ralph after they beat Navy, that I should have listened to offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes before the Navy game when he said our offense is going to be just fine. That was a big concern coming in. People downgraded the wide receiving core, thought BYU was going to be a handoff team. The quarterback is special. The design of the offense is special. And I don't know that Louisiana Tech's going to handle it. Defensively, they're just unable to stop anybody right now. Houston Baptist, Bailey Zapp, quarterback for Houston Baptist, had a nice day against them. I think he threw for over 400 in a losing effort. Louisiana Tech, if they have one, solid entity on that team, it's the offensive unit. And they played very well in the game against Southern Miss. Remember, it was the first game they had played weeks off for coronavirus, and then finally they get on the field and they win on the last play of the game, scoring 31 points. Put up a bunch more. I don't have any problem seeing them score points, but I will say this, Drew. It might be a tough environment, not because of the crowd, because there is none in Provo, but because of the road game and the defense that he's facing for new quarterback Luke Anthony. Remember, they're going to a quarterback split here, but Luke Anthony seems to be the guy that they're using most right now, the better passer of the 2 candidates here. This pass rush for BYU, this defense of BYU, unlike what he's seen his first 2 weeks, I think it could be troublesome. So I understand the movement towards BYU for sure, because they can score enough to separate and cover that type of number now. And I can understand the total, because in my mind, BYU should be able to find their way to 45 once again. And for Louisiana Tech to get 17 out of this, I think is very doable. They've got some really, really good returning skill people on that team.
All right, Robbie, that's the Thursday nighter. That one's on ESPN2. Now we'll move to the Saturday card here. 105, 106, the rotation number. Guys, if you're following along at home, Sports Memo, WagerTalk odd screen is a great way to go. Just click on the rotation number here. We got 105, 106 up next, 3:30 Eastern kick here, Robbie. USF at Cincinnati. That's the South Florida Bulls. 46.5. minus 22 Cincinnati at home, Robbie. Anytime I see a low total 46.5, and one of the teams laying more than 3 touchdowns, it's like automatic, to look towards the dog, just because it's not the market's telling us not a lot of points projected here. However, that doesn't always work. USF, new head coach here, not a lot of, kind of question marks there. Interested in your opinion in this one.
Yeah, Drew, because the last time we saw USF, they contributed nothing to the scoreboard, and the game got to 52 points because that's what Notre Dame had. So USF, I feel bad for them, Drew. I took a quote from head coach Jeff Scott when they asked him about the COVID situation with his team. Remember, they didn't travel to play last week because of that. And here was his quote. He said, well, we'll be without one or more players. That's where he left it, which if you continue on with that quote, he goes on to say, I long for the day where I'll be able to say we'll have 0 players out for this, but that's probably not going to happen this year. So here's a guy who expects his team to be affected by coronavirus personnel-wise in some way, shape, or form, some new numeric form. We don't know the number. Like I say, he puts it at 1 or more. But the quote kind of tells you that that situation is not good at South Florida. And I'll tell you why it's really not good. It's really not good because, as you mentioned, it's a new head coach. They got 2 brand new systems here. We went through all of these in the spring. I'm just going to refresh real quick that you have Charlie Weiss Jr. in as the offensive coordinator here, running an RPO-based system, a little bit different than what South Florida had done. Only had 2 spring practices, so they couldn't get to the field to try and execute it. And then in the fall, when you have the coronavirus situation going on, we've seen it at numerous sites across the country here. Louisiana Tech comes to my mind first, where they dealt with the same type of thing for a long time and were unable to hit. If you're unable to go live in practice consistently every single day, it's tough to pick up a system and execute it. That goes for both sides of the ball for South Florida. They were demolished by Notre Dame. Cincinnati comes off of the Army game where it was it's a classic game against Army, right? 24-10. It's a low possession struggle. But since he gets it done, Luke Fickell has his team in great shape to win the AAC this year. I mean, I wait for the Cincinnati Central Florida game. I think it'll be terrific. Desmond Ridder at quarterback here for this team. Notre Dame did not bring a lot of speed to the table in that game, especially in their wide receiving core. They just bullied South Florida. And Cincinnati can do the same, but they can also get to the perimeter and score. I think Cincinnati was kind of cheap in this game, Drew, at 21 when it opened. As you mentioned, it's been bet up to 22. I just find it difficult to believe that South Florida is going to be able to progress significantly with these new systems, with the constant situation going on that the coach tells us is going to go on. So for me, it's probably going to be Cincinnati, and I may even look at over, because if South Florida is able to get to 10, that probably puts this game over. Cincinnati 38 is well in range for them against this team. Defensively, real quick, one thing I want to mention is that the new defensive coordinator, Glenn Spencer, mandates as part of his defense physical toughness. And as I mentioned before, if you just can't hit every single day, it's hard to develop that mentality. So we saw some shabby tackling against Notre Dame, a stronger, more physical team. I think you might see some shabby tackling here against Cincinnati, a stronger, more physical team and extremely fast. So for me, probably it would be Cincinnati. I think that 21 looked a little cheap. And perhaps the total, again, if USF can get to 10, I think that game can get over.
He's Robbie Veno on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. Find his work at WagerTalk.com. Guys, this is the Every Game on the Board podcast. Wherever you're downloading your podcast at, it's the Sports Memo podcast. Would love it if you could rank it as well. Give a thumbs up. If you're also watching the simulcast on YouTube, the WagerTalk YouTube channel, going to be looking to do this every Wednesday, Thursday going forward for the Every Game on the Board podcast. Next game up here, Robbie, an interesting one in the SEC East here, one that I'm very interested in watch. I think we can pick up a lot from this 12 noon Eastern kick here, Robbie. We're talking South Carolina at Florida. Will Muschamp making his return into Gainesville here. This one on ESPN, 57.5 being the total. Looks like the Gators laying 18 at home. Robbie, something I noticed here with South Carolina was I know they didn't cover against Tennessee with a short number there, landing at 4. I guess it matters where you got them at. I got them at 3.5, so I took the loss. Although I don't necessarily think South Carolina was the wrong side. They were right in that game, Robbie. In Florida, winning and covering against Ole Miss. However, I'm not so sure the Gators were really the right side to cover those 2 touchdowns. Came down to the end there with Ole Miss not punching it in for the 2-point conversion. But Lane Kiffin did give the Gator defense a little bit of issues there, especially in the first half. I'm kind of thinking this number is a little steep here with the Gators laying near 3 touchdowns. But it's something I haven't bet yet. Interested in your opinion here.
Yeah, let me start by saying, Johnny Outlaw, we love you back in the chat room there. Drew, I think the way you started this is exactly the way I see this, as we can learn even more about these two teams. The reason I say that is because for the defensive side of each of these teams, Florida and South Carolina, the opponent is completely different. South Carolina, as you mentioned, is not Lane Kiffin calling plays, which that was as creative an opening game plan as you could get. He was doing everything with Ole Miss. He's got a lot of toys there, and he's putting them all to use right away. But South Carolina isn't that. South Carolina's Colin Hill playing for his old his old head coach, Mike Bobo, who's now the new offensive coordinator at South Carolina. Totally different perspective on offense and play calling than Lane Kiffin. So Florida sees something different this week, whether it's a step up in class, whether it remains the same in class, or whether it's a step down in class. Not sure, but we can learn from it. Like you say, if I had to use my best judgment, Mississippi's a better offensive team than South Carolina is. So I think this might be a slight step down in class for the Florida defense. For South Carolina, you face Justin Guarantano, quarterback for Tennessee. I'm still not sold on that guy. He's been there forever. He still has not been consistently productive. I'm with you. South Carolina in that game every step of the way, really, and could have turned out to be the right side in that particular contest. But here, Kyle Trask and the Florida passing game, Drew, which I think out of that Florida Ole Miss game is the thing I took out of it the most, is I'm surprised how good they were throwing the football right out of the chute, with the loss of the receivers to the NFL that they had. 3 NFL wide receivers they're not just sitting on rosters, they're playing on Sundays. So I didn't know that Florida could come out of the gate throwing the ball that well. That could, however, be a product of a bad Mississippi defense. So again, watching this game will help us learn a little bit more about both of these teams. I'm not aggressively going to the window either way with the point spread, but I do think Florida just looks at this point in time. You, I, and Ralph had a discussion a couple of weeks ago on our Tuesday show about the sudden burst in overs for Florida beginning last season. I don't know, second half. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me.
When Thrash took over.
When he took over, correct. Yeah. It's maybe a 7-game span, I think, if we count the bowl game. Just over, because Dan Mullen is so comfortable running that offense right now and calling the plays. 57.5 to me in Florida games now starts to look a little slight. So maybe I'll venture in towards the over, but I'm not so sure as far as the game itself is concerned.
Yeah, and we've already seen a little tick up here from 55 to 57.5. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets higher. I mean, barring weather, you always got to watch that in the Sunshine State here. But yeah, like you said about Thrash, I mean, it goes back to the question, and I know it's always kind of tough to knock out the incumbent starter and Felipe Franks, who's now, interestingly enough, taking snaps with Arkansas. But Thrash, right when he came in, it was like, man, this offense is clicking on all levels. How did he not start off before? And it just comes to question, how that stuff works out. But absolutely, Robbie, I agree with you. I'm not looking to bet Florida under. I'm really not looking to fade them either. It's just 3 touchdowns against the South Carolina team running the same system. The quarterback, at least, running the same system isn't necessarily a bet I'm looking to go against. It's kind of a difficult handicap. So good stuff there. We got 109, 110 up next, another 12 noon Eastern kick here. This one on ESPNU. Georgia State -1 at home in the old Turner Field here. 68.5 being the total, Robbie.
Yeah, here's one where if you're a guy like me that takes a look at the college card every week, and immediately I've got the bow and arrow out hunting for overs. But here, I think I would just put a blindfold over my eyes and play under 69 for the sheer reason that I think the number is too high. Last week, ECU plays Central Florida, right? And we all know Central Florida can score in 18 seconds if they want to. It's a team that is just loaded with explosive plays. That game, I think it got over the total on maybe the last play or the last
it was close.
It was
close.
We
were both on that, and we had to sweat that one, Robbie.
Yeah, they get the 78. Okay, we're playing UCF. Georgia State's a different animal, a good team and a tempo team, but they really want to run the football. In that game against UL Lafayette, where they almost won, their offensive line looked tremendous. Their leading running back, Destin Coates, carried the ball 34 times, and the play calling percentage-wise was 57 to 42 run pass. So it's a team that probably wants to keep Holton Ahlers and ECU off the field by running the football and working some clock. And I'm not saying they can't gain it in chunks, because against ECU's defense, you can hand off and gain yardage in chunks at times. But there's not going to be the explosive Dylan Gabriel 60-yard passes downfield coming from Cornelius Brown, I don't believe. Not as many as what we saw with UCF. So for the switch in offensive reasons, Central Florida down to Georgia State, 69 looks high. And then for ECU, although they're balanced, Drew, and this has been this way for a couple of years now, they run a lot of plays, and they can run and they can pass, but they don't necessarily pick up yardage in big chunks. They tend to go yards per play wise more in the 4.8 yards per play range. The numbers on them through their first couple of games here, 4.6 last week for Georgia State, by the way, in their game against Lafayette, 4.6 yards per play. And against UCF, East Carolina is 5.5. So neither team showing explosiveness. When you have to score 10 touchdowns and get all 10 extra points, it's a lot. I mean, college football teams, sometimes games make it look real small. Texas Tech did. But in this instance, just because of the way I think it's going to be played and the fact that Central Florida could only get ECU to 78, I don't think Georgia State can get ECU to 70. So for me, I think I'm going to take a shot at, like I say, blindfold myself and play it under.
It's interesting how you put that, Robbie. 10 touchdowns and 10 extra points. That can be important there, especially in college football. Yeah. We got North Carolina at Boston College up next in the ACC, 3:30 on ABC. -13 in the hook or -14, depending where you're shopping. That's UNC laying on the road. 54 the total here, Robbie.
It's hard because it looks too obvious and it looks too easy. And anytime they look too obvious or too easy to us, as sports bettors, handicappers, we're always, wait a minute, it can't be that easy. But maybe it is here, Drew. Let's go through Boston College real quick. Another team with a new head coach, Jeff Hafley. Another team with a new offensive coordinator, Frank Cignetti Jr., who came in and threw out Steve Adazio's old 2 tight end. Let's run the football system. And they work in a pro-style system. Again, difficult to learn right off the bat, but the opponents the first 2 weeks of the season, Duke and Texas State, really have been able to hold Boston College to minimal yardage on the offensive side. And last week against Texas State, now this is Sun Belt defense, right? And I don't want to degrade Texas State, but they're towards the bottom half of the Sun Belt, especially where defense is concerned. Anyway, they go to Chestnut Hill last week. And Boston College could not run the ball like they can historically down Texas State's throat. They get in true rushing yards. Now, I took out the sack yard. It's 25 rushing attempts, 104 rushing yards. That's only 4 a pop against Texas State. But the week before that against Duke, where they win by 20, which is very deceptive, 36 rushing attempts for 119 yards, only 3.3 per carry. Those are not Boston College numbers. It's not a good Boston College offensive line so far, because if I take those poor rushing numbers and add into the fact that Boston College's new quarterback, Phil Jurkovich, a Notre Dame transfer, has been sacked 8 times by Duke and Texas State. It's problematic. They can't pass protect and they can't run block. And normally I would think, you've got 2 teams you should beat, and then you've got a big game in North Carolina following that. Maybe you're not showing a lot of the new playbook. I just don't think they can execute the playbook right now, Drew. I don't think this quarterback is there yet. He's a bigger pocket-style passer. I don't think this offensive line is as good as what BC is used to. David Bailey, the running back, hasn't gotten untracked yet. So if you have that kind of stagnant pedestrian offense and you're going to try and play UNC with Sam Howell and that high-flying offense, you get in trouble real quick. If you don't score your first 2 possessions, you'll be down 14-0 before you can blink, and it makes it somewhat easy. I mean, it was real easy for the guys who got to the window and laid 10. But even now, laying 13, North Carolina can beat people by 13 in a hurry. So I just don't know. I don't think Boston College is there, Drew. I think even though UNC had the week off last week because of the coronavirus, I think they'll come ready to play. It's an ACC game. I would lay the points with UNC.
He's Robbie Veno, obviously knows his college football and his 5% blue chip totals on a 16-8, 66% streak. That goes all the way back to 2018. Check him out, WagerTalk.com. He doesn't only do college football, he's got NFL as well, and he's been really good in the NFL, actually on an 11-3 NFL run, and he's got his top play, his NFL premier best bet up right now. WagerTalk.com. Check the handicapper page, Robbie Veno, and it's actually discounted just $11 for special just running today. $11 for his NFL premium best bet, WagerTalk.com. Staying in the ACC, next game up here, Robbie, 4 o'clock Eastern kick, 113, 114. This one on ACC Network. We're seeing Virginia Tech at Duke. Virginia Tech minus 10.5. 54 the total in this one, Robbie.
How about Virginia Tech, Drew? 23 players they were without last week, including quarterback Herndon Hooker, who is the guy that turned that offense around last year. But what they did, they had a minimal wide receiving crew. I think they only had 3 wide receivers. So they had 58 total plays. They ran it 41 times. And boy, did they run it, because they ran for 314 yards against NC State. And that was one of those, we call them, situational plays where NC State had the game under the belt and Virginia Tech had been waiting for weeks to play, but Virginia Tech ran NC State off the field. This week, from what I'm seeing, they're going to get Hooker back at quarterback, and these 23 players are going to slowly come back to the team. I don't think you'll see all 23 here, but certainly it was a confidence builder for Virginia Tech. And what's not a confidence builder for Duke is the fact that they've turned it over 12 times in the last 2 weeks. I mean, Duke played themselves. Here's another thing. If I go back to Boston College real quick, Drew, Duke gave them 5 turnovers, and BC could only get 26 points. Last week, Duke had 7 turnovers, 4 consecutive possessions in the fourth quarter to allow Virginia to come from behind, down 20-17, win that game 38-20. So for Duke, can you hang on to the football one time? Stop throwing interceptions, stop fumbling. I would think if we just play the do factor, Duke's not going to turn it over on average 6 times this week again. So I think they'll be in this game. If you look at the total yardage in those last 2 games where they lost and lost by margin, 18-20, they only lost the total yardage battle to BC by 33 yards. And they only lost the total yardage battle to UVA by 40 yards. So they're in the games competitively until they give the ball away, and way too many times. If they can hang on to it, I think they can stick in this game. Again, you just revert back to the Notre Dame game, their first of the season, where Brian Kelly praised their defensive ends, their pass rush, where he praised their starting set of corners. Those guys are still on the team. They still have a really good defense, but Chase Bryce and the offense needs to hang on to the ball. I'm willing to give them a shot this week. I think maybe the line's a little bit inflated off of what Virginia Tech did and certainly what Duke did or failed to do. I think 10.5 is a little too much here. I would try Duke in that game.
All right, Robbie. Next game up, we're heading to the SEC. Missouri at Tennessee, 12 noon Eastern kick here on the SEC network. Seems like each and every week here, Robbie, at least the last two, right out the gate, college football getting started with a loaded noon slate. This is one here. Missouri at Tennessee, SEC network here. We got Tennessee laying 11.5 in Knoxville, 48.5 being the total in this one, Robbie.
Yeah, and as close as I am to the Mizzou program, Drew, I don't have a lot to go on this game. The only thing that I think really makes sense here is that Mizzou had their opening game against Alabama. And anytime you're battle tested against Alabama, the very next opponent looks inferior just because you played Alabama. So I think it's a step down in class here for Missouri, even though it's a travel situation. I also agree with you that Tennessee was not, they probably should have beaten South Carolina on paper a little worse than they did. And as you mentioned, South Carolina could have very well been the right side in that game. So Justin Guarantano continues to be a thorn in my side is from a betting perspective. I don't like to back him. I'd rather be against him. Kind of like the Mizzou defense this time around. They didn't perform well offensively last week, but I'm going to give that to Alabama. There was a 74-yard drive at the end of the game where they scored a touchdown, but that was against Alabama's backups. Again, I think Missouri and Tennessee are more equal personnel-wise than this line would indicate. And I know you got a first-year head coach, and I know you've got a couple of new systems where Missouri is concerned, but I still think athlete-wise, they're on par with Tennessee, and I'd probably very, very weakly take the points in that game. 11.5 to me just seems too much for Tennessee to cover right now.
Yeah, Robbie, I'll say a couple things here about Missouri. Losing 38-19 to Alabama, something I took away is, one, I think their quarterback actually fits the system really well. And two, if you watch the end of that, which I did because I was holding the Missouri ticket, and Eli Drinkowitz, the new head coach, Robbie, he was calling timeouts. The game was obviously over, and they were looking to still punch it in. That tells me two things about Missouri. When they're catching double-digit points, I'm going to want to look to be on them more than fade them, and also look to be betting them over, because that's something a lot of, I guess you could say, I don't want to say sharps, but betting syndicates out there kind of going through just betting the numbers. They're not going to really factor that into account. And us as sports bettors watching the game, that's where you can kind of get an advantage. So that's two things I wanted to throw out there with Missouri. Not sure if you had any follow-up on that, Robbie.
Well, that final touchdown, as you mentioned, Drew, and Eli Drinkwitz calling timeouts down the field, that touchdown drive was led by backup quarterback Connor Bazelak, and it did not sit well, at least from viewing it on TV, it didn't sit well with Alabama head coach Nick Saban, because after the game, Drinkwitz ran out there, and it looked like he was just trying to explain to his father or something what he had done and why he did it. Saban didn't want any part of it, but I'm with you. He's a rah-rah guy. He was not the first choice at Missouri. He was like the fourth choice. The board turned down 3 guys before that. The AD kept going in with names and kept getting turned down until they got to Drinkwitz. But when he got to town, he's won that fan base over. And I'm not going to say he's got a free pass his first year, but he's got some rope to work with here. And he's just showing right out of the gate that they're not going to quit over 60 minutes. So I'm with you. When you see a team like that has no quit, you want to be on their side more often than not, especially getting double digits.
Robbie, we got 117, 118 up next. Another 12 noon Eastern kick here. Man, I feel like it's going to be tough to keep up with all these games at this time slot, Robbie. We got Baylor at West Virginia on ABC. Baylor -3 on the highway, 53 being the total. I kind of like West Virginia here, Robbie. Can you talk me off of it?
I don't think I can. As much as I like Charlie Brewer, and he's one of my 3 favorite quarterbacks in the country playing college football, I just can't. I worry for him in this. It's not Kansas, right? I mean, they play Kansas last week. They coast home. Their first game of the year, a team that only returned 2 defensive starters. Remember, that was the number 1 defense in the Big 12 last year. Baylor was all the way to the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. Played Oklahoma very tough twice last year. Lost heartbreaking games to Oklahoma twice last year. But West Virginia's a good defensive team, and it's a pressure defensive team. If Baylor has one question mark that we can't answer from last week's game, on the offensive side of the ball, it's the offensive line. Everything else is in place. They've got skill position guys, and then when you throw Brewer in, that can rack up 40 points a game. And this is Larry Fedora's new offense, right? I mean, it's new to Baylor. It's not a new offense to Fedora, but it's new to Baylor. And Charlie Brewer loves it. I mean, during the summer, Charlie Brewer said, we're going to throw this ball downfield, and we're going to make a bunch of big plays when he was asked to describe this system that he was playing in. When you get a quarterback with the type of talent that he has and put him in that type of system and the smarts that he has, I don't have any problem or any trouble believing that he can run it right away. They ran it pretty good last week, but I worry about the protection. I think West Virginia is going to come at him. It's a shame for West Virginia that Morgantown can't be filled with fans, because if it was, I'd be even more scared for Baylor offensively. And that being said, on the other side of the coin, I like the matchup with West Virginia's offense against Baylor's defense. Baylor, again, only 2 returning starters. They did get Arkansas State's all-conference defensive end to transfer, so I'll give them 3. But Kansas is not a test. West Virginia is a test, and I think West Virginia offensively will do some damage here. So I'm with you, Drew. I think West Virginia is the right side.
He's Robbie Veno on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. Guys, we got one more game in this segment. Then we're going to bring mid-major Matt in and finish off the next 10 games on the slate. Check out Robbie Veno's top play is NFL Premier Best Bet, discounted to just $11 right now on WagerTalk.com. Also check out his 3, 7-day, 30-day all access packages. He's been hot. NFL current run 11-3, 79%. Also his college football 5%ers. 16-8, that's 67%, going all the way back to 2018. All that available at WagerTalk.com. Robbie, finish it up here this segment with an ACC battle here. 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific kick here on ACC Network. Virginia at Clemson, a rematch of the ACC championship game. Virginia fans hoping it's a lot closer than that championship game was. But Clemson laying 4 touchdowns at home, 55 the total in this one, Robbie.
Yeah, not sure I would want to rush to lay the 4 touchdowns, Drew. But I do believe that the total here might be just a shade low. And I, and Ralph discussed this the other day, but I'll make my point again, or my case for the total here. Last year in that game that you just described, they scored 79 points. Is there 24 points worth of difference between that game and this game that's going to be played now? There's a difference, but I'm not sure it's worth 24 points. Bryce Perkins, the quarterback for Virginia last year, certainly a better option at this point in time. Brennan Armstrong, the new quarterback, could grow into being a very good quarterback here at UVA. But certainly Bryce Perkins, was dynamic last year. And the Clemson wide receiving core was loaded last year. T. Higgins, Justin Ross not there anymore. Ross with a medical condition won't play this season. Only Amari Rodgers and others here. So Clemson offensively, that deep downfield game, Drew, I think is a little bit less. But again, it's not that much. And for me to think that this game's going to go from 79 points down to 54 points, I don't think that's happening. I'd probably look at the over. I know Virginia benefited from the Duke turnovers and some short fields last week, but I think their offense is good enough here to get some points against Clemson. Like I say, I'm not really keen on laying 28 or taking 28, but I think playing over 55 is a smart move here. Clemson can find their way into the 40s in almost any game, and I think Virginia is worth 17, 20 points here.
All right, good stuff from Robbie Veno, a mainstay here on the Every Game on the Board podcast, doing it each and every week throughout the college football season, also bringing in Minty Bets to do the NFL side of things. But guys, appreciate everybody tuning in here. We'll be right back with Mid-Major Matt. Robbie, want to throw out anything before we shut this down?
Just good luck to all our viewers. Thanks for watching these videos. We love doing every game on the board, and hopefully everybody has a big weekend.
All right, Robbie. Best of luck, man. Thanks, and we'll talk next week.